I'm Terry Kolath, and it's a pleasure to welcome Seth Mendel today. We are talking about his fall series on the Tsars of Russia. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining me and for giving this series on Russia.
Well, I'm certainly glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to doing the 6 lectures on the Tsars of Russia. It's one of my specialties, so to speak. I taught the course for, I guess, about 20 years at Avon Old Farm School, private school in Connecticut. And so here I am now teaching. I taught teenagers there, and now I'm teaching seniors here.
Fabulous. This is better, right?
It's fun on both ends, I'll tell you that.
That's great. Well, I think we're all interested in the Tsars of Russia. So different, so out of our own range of experience, isn't it?
It certainly is, and so much of that early period was far in advance of Columbus sailing the ocean blue.
Amazing.
Or Jamestown, 1607. I mean, a lot of Russian history took place prior to the English and the French and so forth coming to the New World.
Interesting. So when do you start this? What period?
We start in what's called Kievan Russia, and that is back in the 800s. And so there was a major trade route way back then from the Baltic to the north down to the Black Sea and hence the Mediterranean.
Which is what gives us a basis for this rich history that's not as common. I mean, not everybody is the same as we might think, right?
Right.
And so you take us all through the Tsars, all the history. When does Russia start to interact with the rest of the world?
Well, we have to work up through that. So we do this Kievan period, which is very interesting because it includes the Vikings as well that come in and get into this trade. It's this major trade route, you see, because what's down at the bottom is the Byzantine Empire with all its culture and so forth.
Right.
And so this works up into Russia, into Kiev, which becomes the hub there on the Dnieper River. Then the Mongols come in.
What a clash of cultures.
That's right. The Mongols come in and destroy. And it's 100 years later until Moscow is founded. And it wasn't until about 1630 or so that Michael Romanov, the first of the Romanovs, was picked to be the Tsar, picked by the church, as a matter of fact. The church has always been, was then, a stabilizing force in Russia. And so that brings us to Michael Romanov. And let's say about 3 generations later, we get Peter the Great, who was a Romanov. And so that's when Russia begins to really interact with the Western. That brings us to Alexander I. And Alexander I was the Tsar that defeated Napoleon with Kutuzov. And so we take some time in the lecture to really go into that fantastic saga of Napoleon's invasion and the Russian retreat, and then of course the French retreat and the Russian advance.
Right.
And you know, it's such a parallel to the Second World War. The Germans came in, the Germans retreated. At any rate, there's a real irony right here, because Alexander I was the head of the European coalition that defeats Napoleon. And he rides triumphantly into Paris, the Russians, all the way to Paris in 1814.
Goodness, this is amazing.
Unbelievable. At the pinnacle of power, right? And yet, 50 years later, by mid-century, 1855, Russia is defeated by the European powers, English and French predominantly, in the Great Crimean War under Nicholas I. And so what happened in there? And so we take some time and explain that.
And now we're up to the last Tsar of the Tsars of Russia. Tell us just a bit.
I will. And of course, it's really a sad story because the last Tsar of Russia was Nicholas II, and he unfortunately was a very inept individual, distrusted intellectuals, distrusted his advisors, and so forth. And Europe was falling apart. The German Kaiser was very aggressive. The Balkans were a seething cauldron of nationalist interests, different states, Slavs on one side, Turks on the other side, Russia on the other side, so on and so forth. And that erupts, of course, the Sarajevo, the shooting of the Archduke of Austria, heir apparent to the throne, and we have the First World War break out, and Russia is in no position to fight a major war. Yeah. And so even though the Kaiser and Nicholas II were cousins, the Germans still invaded right here in 1914.
So now we're moving through the series, and there's more to come. Please find out in the Academy brochure what's coming in each of the next sessions, and sign up at any of our concierge desks for more of the Tsars of Russia with Seth Mendel.